Hello and welcome to Group 4's presentation about fracking. Now, before I can begin to go in depth about fracking, I must explain a few key elements. For example, the United States currently relies on fossil fuels for most production purposes, such as cars, factories, airplanes, and boats. We, as the United States, are always looking for the most efficient way to obtain these fossil fuels. Currently, we import most of our oil from Saudi Arabia, Canada, and South America, such as countries as Venezuela and Colombia. However, at the same time that we're importing, we also have to pay very, very high tariffs and taxes just to bring it into the country. This includes shipping, whether it be by airplane or boat, and this also includes paying a tax to those that put it onto the ships and the boats. So what's the easiest way the United States can get oil? We look for it ourselves. How so? Well, there are two types of oil drilling in the United States. There's conventional oil drilling and there's fracking. Let's go over conventional oil drilling first. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why are people so crazy about oil? Well, it all started in the 1800s. In the 1800s, you had one ginormous oil tycoon by the name of John D. Rockefeller. And what he invented was a way to get oil out the ground and use it in such productions such as factories, cars, automobiles, and airplanes. What happens is that after John D. Rockefeller discovered there's a conventional oil method, so did other tycoons. So what did they do? They drilled and drilled and drilled until they sucked all the oil out of the United States, or at least all the pools of conventional oil. So where does this come into play with the continental shelf? It's a good question you asked. Because we've dug up so much oil and we've used so much of it already, we're currently out of fossil fuels that are found in the contiguous United States. We get coal, but there's no more oil here. So where do you get oil now if you're still within the United States? Conventional oil drilling that's done offshore. Offshore to the United States means within the first 300 feet of the border between the United States and the ocean. Those 300 feet are technically ours. They're under our territory. So companies like BP, Mobil, and Exxon all go out into the continental shelf and they drill. They drill the same way that John D. Rockefeller and other big oil tycoons did back in the 1800s. So what is this you hear about all these oil spills? Well, aren't those hazardous? Technically, yes. However, they're not caused by fracking. So what exactly does fracking have to do with all of this? Well, because we've conventionally oil drilled all the oil out of the contiguous United States, we have to find another way to get our oil. This is where fracking comes into play. In the ground, there are rocks. Of course, you knew that. Everybody does. However, when sediment rocks are buried, they then become cemented together due to pressure. Sometimes the rocks get buried with organic matter. Organic matter can mean anything as long as it's organic in shape, size, genetic, bio, makeup. For example, a dead carcass of an animal that is rotted somewhere in a bog, that's organic matter. If a tree dies and is left to rot in the middle of the forest, that's organic matter. The organic matter then becomes layered on top with different types of dust, different types of dirt, so on and so forth. This is also why you have layers when you dig into the earth. These so-called layers are sometimes buried together with the same organic material. The organic material then cements over time due to pressure, and it turns into coal, oil, and other types of resources. So as this organic matter and rock sink below the surface, it can then become sludge. And when the sludge mixes together, it then solidifies over a great amount of time. I'm talking 200-300 million years. All this time, it then turns into oil. And if you give it a couple more million years, it can then become natural gas. That's how we get most of our fossil fuels currently. Rocks then act as a sponge under high pressure, and they absorb surrounding gases and liquids such as oil and natural gas. Oil companies that are in desperate need of oil managed to dig up the various amounts of oil aquifers in the past 150 years and are now relying on fracking to fulfill the needs of the nation. For example, let's go into detail about fracking. Fracking forces fluids in a rock, which then causes stress besides pressure to be placed onto the rock. So what happens when you place a lot of pressure on a rock? Well, it tends to break. When it breaks, this process is known as the elasticity of rock. The more elastic it is, the easier it is it's going to break. Take a rubber band, for example. If you stretch out a rubber band, what happens? It potentially breaks, and it breaks into one little piece. And if you stretch the same rubber band again, it'll break into another piece. That's just elasticity. Let's start over from fracking. So what exactly is fracking? Well, fracking is where an oil company sends one big pipe down the ground. Now, the same pipe also has a suction force in it, and the same suction force can be reversed. It can either push something down into the earth or it can bring it back up. It acts as a straw, for example. So when oil companies send this ginormous tube down into the earth, they tend to send fluids as well, and those fluids can then add pressure to the rocks. So what happens when you add pressure to rocks? Just like I said before, elasticity. It breaks. Within those breaks, it tends to break up into small pathways. Now, with any type of oil, natural gas, coal, all it wants to do is escape to the surface because it's less dense than what it's under. So once you break into the rock, the companies then reverse the switch, and it acts as a straw and sucks up all the natural gas, oil, and coal. Now, currently, that's how we get most of our oil or other natural gas resources. And it's good. That means we have plenty of it because we haven't dug everywhere. However, it's also very bad for the environment. How so? Let's find out.
As humans, we need to care about our environment. Our environment is an important thing to us, and we need to realize that. A clean environment is essential for healthy living. We are responsible for what way the water is going. We must not allow it to get out of hand when it already is. An eco-admirer journalist Jasmine states that the overall temperature of the Earth is rising due to our activities releasing large amounts of gas to the atmosphere and cause global warming. As well as that, she states that biodiversity is important because we have most of the resources we need because of biodiversity. Biodiversity means a mixture of humans, plants, and animals in the world. And here's a video on how fracking affects our environment.
When a company is fracking, what they do is they drill a hole down thousands of feet into the earth. They pump it full of water and sands and a mixture of chemicals. And it goes into the earth at such high pressures that it actually shatters the rock. And then what happens is there are millions of gallons of water in the earth. They have to pump that out before they can recover the gas. And the question that we're dealing with is, what do you do with all that water? Because once it comes out, it's contaminated with those chemicals. It's also contaminated oftentimes with radioactive elements in the earth and with huge amounts of salt.
Our bad choices for the environment means habitat. It's habitat loss, which decreases biodiversity, which causes more problems for humans, because we won't have the sources we need to live. And one of the number one issues affecting our environment and could possibly have a huge future impact is fracking. And the reason I say we should care about our environment is because fracking alone doesn't harm the environment. It becomes dangerous because you're breaking rock and controlling the breaks. You're freeing natural gas through the broken rock. It also contains water. If you frack the rocks below the aquifer, you create more cracks and the natural gas can leak into the water. According to Jenny of the Nature World News, those living near fractured wells are potentially at risk of health threats, even the increased amount of organic compounds and air toxins in the area. Following up with that, the fluids are not safe to be near water. If the fluids get in the groundwater, you can contaminate groundwater. Contaminating groundwater causes issues to our biodiversity. Water is something all plants, animals, and humans need to live. Without water, or having contaminated water, things will start to die off. We will not have the resources that we need to live. And that is how fracking negatively affects our environment and can cause issues for our well-being. With that being said, as humans, we need to take a step toward making a difference in our environment.
As it's been stated, fracking can have many harmful effects on the environment. So isn't it time that we started managing it better or finding safer alternatives? Over the years, there have been many technological advancements that have allowed the United States to find alternative methods towards fracking. BusinessInsider.com states that millennials are more health conscious than any of the other generations. So if this is true, shouldn't we be the ones paving the way towards change? Climate and Energy Program Director Jeremy Nichols and Society of Environmental Journalists member Bob Weinhold maintain that the Environmental Protection Agency updated their pollution regulations in 2012, and while this is a big milestone, there's still more to be done. Former president of the Environmental Law Institute, Leslie Carothers, states that the oil and gas industry has historically been regulated by state agencies, either specialized oil and gas agencies, or more commonly, in eastern gas-producing states, by environmental agencies. On the federal and state level, companies are to be in compliance with the Clean Air Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, National Environmental Policy Act, also known as the NEPA, the Endangering Species Act, or the Occupational Safety and Health Act. On the state level, local governments often set zoning and production rules. The Denver Business Journal states that local governments can sign a Memorandum of Understanding, which is a legally binding agreement between operators and local governments that set clear rules for energy development in their community, including fracking. However, there have been many concerns that regulations at the state level are not strict enough, specifically in states like Pennsylvania. So, if companies are finding loopholes in the Clean Air and Clean Water Acts, what is the solution? Is it better regulations or alternative options? Through various avenues of research, it's been determined that there is no immediate alternative method available for hydraulic fracking. However, investments are being made on its behalf to make it safer. Peter Haywood of the Chemical Engineer magazine states that the Environmental Protection Agency, also known as the EPA, has indicated that the future lies with an efficient integration of regulation and monitoring at the state level. In 2014, the EPA started requiring that health and safety studies be submitted by manufacturers, processors, and distributors of any chemical substances, thus furthering their efforts to maintain safety regulations for the environment. Because of the dangers of groundwater contamination, many scientists have produced ideas of fracking alternatives. Those include investments in wind and solar energy research. Wind power has been used as a safe alternative method for natural gas. One of the main concerns here is the CO2 emissions that fracking produces. By switching to alternative forms of energy, like solar and wind power, those emissions are greatly reduced and serve as a more long-term solution. However, as demonstrated in this video, solar and wind energy are far more expensive to use and develop than any other forms of energy. That being said, the only way to fix the dangers caused by fracking is to practice it safer. While many are not a fan of fracking due to its environmental dangers, it's important to note that fracking for natural gas is in fact an alternative to fossil fuels. While it may not be the safest method, it is providing time for others to invest in more long-term solutions. In the meantime, fracking is reducing CO2 emissions by half in comparison to coal. Using the regulations set in place by the EPA, states are continuing to get better at practicing safe fracking and keeping water from becoming contaminated. While our group advocates for the research of alternative fuel methods, we recognize that while there is no safe way to go about hydraulic fracking, there is no alternative method available at the time. However, we remain optimistic about the developments of alternative fuels and better regulated fracking in the meantime. Author John Klein has stated that energy efficiency is beneficial to the environment, financial health of businesses, and consumers, not to mention it creates jobs. Be that as it may, there are still many risks to fracking, such as groundwater contamination. Now's the time to start implementing change. As our group has researched, it can be deduced that health and safety cautious individuals should be caring about the environmental well-being of our Earth, and that at times fracking can be a contradiction to those efforts. As individuals advocating for the safety of our Earth, we should be the generation that is consistent in innovating and investing in alternative methods for hydraulic fracking.